Hey, it's Mike Brennan, and we're doing a special holiday edition. It's tough to corner Paul because he's always on the road doing something. So we have Paul Eisenstein back with us again from Headlight.News. And what I said to him was, I think it'd be kind of interesting to look at what we've done in the headlines, as it were, in autos and vehicles in 2024, and then have him look into his crystal ball and predict what might be coming down the line in 2025. So let's start with 2024. What really grabbed you that you think made a significant impact on the industry, the vehicle industry, be it commercial trucks or consumers or cars, whatever, in 2024? What really grabbed you?
Gosh, there are so many headlines. There are so many things to look at. Let's just look at a couple of end of the year things, and then I'll look back at stories that sort of crossed the entire year. Obviously, the passing of Jimmy Carter is important. People say, why? Because he had a huge influence on the auto industry. He was very proactive when it came to environmental stuff. So, he created the Department of Energy, among other things. And he pushed a lot for changes when it came to emissions and fuel economy and so on. Though he also, something that people forget, was that Carter was surprisingly proactive when it came to working with business. In fact, out of office, he often talked about just how much some of the major businesses in the U.S., including auto companies, went out of their way to work with him to come up with a good compromise on things like emissions and safety technology. Now, the other big story we've seen in recent weeks, of course, is Nissan and Honda. The idea that these two manufacturers, the number two and the number three Japanese manufacturers, are now expected to merge by 2026. That's something I don't think anybody would have expected uh, going back, say, a year or so before things started to really fall in. The house started to cave in over at Nissan. And of course, with, Tokyo dot corp, uh, we have the government pressing very hard to try to save those two companies and to keep them Japanese owned rather than selling out. There have been some serious interests from a couple of Chinese companies in buying Nissan, including, of course, the company that makes all those Apple phones.
Well, all markets consolidate eventually, and I've lost track. It's somewhere in the neighborhood of what, 30 OEMs out there in the world, might be more than that. And
Well, if you exclude the Chinese, and now we're getting into another very big story for the year, which is the rise of the Chinese.
yeah,
5 years ago, they exported what, maybe a million vehicles. That has now, I think for this year, it's going to be well over 5 million.
hmm.
They are now collectively, the various Chinese brands like BYD and Great Wall now account for a substantial percentage of the European market, the Latin American market, including Mexico. And a lot of folks in the United States are now worried, would they come to the United States? Now, in one of the rare cases where we have agreement between Joe Biden and Donald Trump, both of them want to head off the Chinese from coming into the United States. Biden early this year, you may recall, quadrupled up to 100% the tariffs on Chinese EVs, which basically has meant that as long as they're exporting them to the United States, they're not going to be able to get in here. But the Chinese are looking, particularly BYD, which is very big in Mexico, they're looking at other options. It could include setting up factories in Canada or Mexico, probably Mexico, though they may find no other option but to actually set up an assembly plant here in the United States.
Yeah, that avoids the tariffs. Speaking of Donald Trump, he's supposedly going to be killing the $7,500 tax deduction for vehicles, electric vehicles. So I don't know it for a fact. I just know that's what's been discussed. What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that it's likely we're going to see the incentives go away. But then again, maybe Musk will say, no, we need these. The reality is one of the quiet stories has been the decline of Tesla here in the United States, made up largely by, they're making up the lost volume in the US by what's happening in China in particular, but also in Europe. What I think will shock some people when the final numbers are released is that only two manufacturers lost volume and share this year in the United States, Tesla and Stellantis, while BMW was pretty flat. But the fact that Tesla, which we've all been hearing everybody say, oh, this is the future, it's going to take over the American auto industry. Well, they are definitely taking some hits. And I think a lot of that has to do with the fact that EV buyers tend to be on the liberal end of the spectrum, and Elon Musk has moved so far to the right, there's nowhere else to go.
Yes, particularly in California. That's a very liberal market, and I think people there are not real excited about him.
No,
Uh,
no.
and so they would not buy his vehicle to support him, but who knows? Maybe they will. I mean, prices certainly on the Teslas are coming way down.
Hmm.
So,
Yeah.
but he's got to do that. And then the question is, there's some noise about him maybe moving away from EVs and going to hydrogen. That would be another topic we could talk about. Do you think there's any possibility of that?
Well, we found that Elon Musk will say what's necessary when it's necessary, but he has called fuel cell technology, hydrogen fuel cells. He refers to them so far as fool cells,
Mm.
saying that there's really no justification for those.
Hmm.
Um, if he did move in that direction, I would think that the most likely place he would be in offering an alternative power source to people who might be interested in the Tesla Semi.
Hmm.
Uh, the Semi, with its big battery pack, is functional for, short to moderate long distances. I forgot what number they're saying. Maybe you remember, Mike.
Four or
What are they
five
saying?
hundred miles or something,
I
maybe,
thought
or
they were doing 500 or so.
yeah,
But
something like
and
that.
and there is a decent percentage of 18-wheeler truck traffic that does run it at that or shorter distances, a lot of times from the ports to nearby warehouses. So that might make sense. But most of the experts, and I have to agree with them, suggest that the strongest potential for hydrogen is in trucking, particularly long distance trucking.
I don't know if everybody has a path. Everybody's trying different paths
Yeah.
for
And,
whatever works for them, so.
yeah, and that's another story. That's another big story that has played out over the entire year. And whether you had Trump or not in office, if it was Kamala Harris or or Donald Trump, it wouldn't have completely changed the question of what is the path that EVs will be taking. Almost everybody believes now that we still will see electric technology come to dominate as we get into the 30s and particularly into the 40s. But the pace at which it comes on may take longer.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, we saw an 800% growth in EV sales in the US between 2019 and 2023. This year, it's only 10%. And you have to put the word only in quotes because, Mike, you've been covering this business like me for decades, and you know how rare it is to see any any segment grow 10% in a year. And you certainly don't historically take a 10% growth and say, oh, that's really terrible. No, it's quite strong. EVs are coming on. There's more coming and prices are actually beginning to come down. We're seeing new low-cost models like the Equinox EV from Chevrolet. And I think that as prices come down, new product comes out, And if the auto industry, backed by the charger industry and the feds, can start solving some of the problems with the charging infrastructure, I think you'll start to see EV sales grow again in the second half of the decade.
Yeah, and then there's debate about are you really saving money you driving an electric vehicle versus driving an ICE vehicle? Obviously, it's a big difference for the environment, but there's that question hanging out there. It costs a lot of money to buy that electricity to charge that vehicle. Are you really saving any money? What are your thoughts?
Oh, I think anybody who questions this is just smoking, just putting out a lot of uh, garbage. Let's put it that way. Uh, I have an EV, as you know, and it's an F-150 Lightning. So, like any full-size pickup, it will use energy, but at an average of somewhere between 2.5 and 3 miles per kilowatt hour. Uh, the cost to operate it if I charge at home is so much less than powering an F-150 by gasoline.
Hmm.
Even the Ford F-150 hybrid drivetrain does not come close to matching the cost. Now, if I were to be charging it most of the time at public chargers, where you're paying double or more the home rate, uh, the difference starts to mitigate. It becomes harder to necessarily sell EVs purely on price.
Hmm.
But if you're driving a lot and you're charging, you plug in every morning at your house as we do, uh, even in winter, where you are, of course, burning more electrons, so to speak.
Hmm.
Uh, I save a lot. And over the life of that vehicle, I expect it to more than cover the additional price of buying a Lightning versus a standard F-150.
And your home electricity bill has arisen significantly at all or not?
Well, yeah, of course. I mean, if I were using the same credit card to buy gasoline as I'm using to pay Detroit Edison, uh, it'd still be less. I'd still see my monthly credit card statement go down. But of course it's going to be because I'm transferring my energy costs from sunny Sunoco over on the corner on Woodward to Detroit Edison.
Yeah. Okay. What else is going on out there that really caught your attention this year and you want to note?
Well, we talked a little bit about the Nissan Honda merger.
Hmm.
Obviously, one of the questions is what's happening among industry leaders. We're seeing a lot of turmoil up at the top, and one of the biggest shakeups happened at Stellantis. Not really a surprise when you consider that, as I mentioned before, Stellantis was one of only two companies to lose ground in the market this past year. Um, it's a bit shocking at one level. I remember sitting down with another video colleague, as it were, John McElroy, of course.
Hmm.
I was on his show a few years ago, and the guest for that episode was Jim Farley, nonetheless, just before he was officially promoted to CEO. And so he was still reporting. He had a boss there, the old Steelcase chief executive,
Hackett. Yeah.
Mr. Hackett, exactly,
Yeah.
Jim Hackett. And so as we were chatting and said to Jim, so who is the best CEO in the business? We all expected he would just do the politically correct thing and say, oh, Jim Hackett, of course. He didn't. He said Carlos Tavares, who
Hmm.
at the time was doing remarkable things. Remember, Peugeot, the PSA group, which included Citroën,
Hmm.
was going down the toilet as fast as Nissan is right now, probably faster. And yet, Tavares, who left Nissan, came in and within a year was starting to show big improvements. In fact, Tavares purchased for PSA before the merger, he purchased the Opel Vauxhall unit from GM. And guess what? They were money losing for a decade under GM, but Opel Vauxhall became profitable within 12 months
Hmm.
under Tavares. So everybody thought, oh, this genius is going to do wonderful things when they complete the merger with, between PSA and the Fiat Chrysler organization.
Hmm.
It looked that way for a year, maybe a year and a half, but the last 18 months turned to, well, we'll say garbage. I'll be polite. Um, and it just it just seemed like he couldn't come up with a good solution. He and the board couldn't see eye to eye, and whether he was formally asked to leave or, as he claims, just decide to leave because he couldn't get his way is irrelevant. The fact is, we are we have no acting CEO at Stellantis right now, and it's probably going to be the first quarter or so before we get a new one to replace Tavares.
I'm not sure who that would be. It's always been. I go back to my days at the Free Press when I was the Chrysler beat reporter before the Germans bought them and messed them up. Chrysler back then was an incredible company, had probably the best team in the industry, and then you know, so ever since for the last 25 years, it's just been one suitor after another, shall we say. And I've
Well,
lost track of how many times they've changed hands. Four or five, I think.
well,
So,
you had the Daimler Chrysler merger, or as people would say, Daimler, the Chrysler is silent.
yeah,
Merger of equals wasn't. Then they sold it off to Cerberus, the three-headed dog,
right.
venture capital company,
Yeah,
and eventually Fiat came in and bought a controlling stake
yeah.
to help get the bailout from the feds, and
Mm.
now we of course have the Stellantis deal. So one of the real stories, you asked me to look forward. One of the real stories of 2025 will be the continuation broadly of the Stellantis challenge, if you will, trying to get that turned around. But when you narrow it down, probably one of the most important issues will be what happens at Dodge.
Mm.
They pulled the plug on both the Charger and Challenger muscle cars and are coming back finally with a fully electric alternative, the Dodge Charger Daytona. Now, somewhere between when they told us that they were going to make that move and now, they realized that there were just too many people that were not going to go electric. So they decided to bring out a gas version. It'll drop the Daytona name and just be called the Dodge Charger, but it won't have a Hemi and it won't have a Hellcat. In fact, the highest performance versions of the new generation Charger will be all electric.
Mm.
And we're waiting to hear about one model called the Banshee, which I expect will come in at well over 1,000 horsepower.
My goodness. What about the Hornet? Is that going away?
Well, the Hornet has been a hybrid. They're actually bringing in a non-hybrid version of it, trying to bring it in at a lower cost.
Hmm.
Uh, that's one of the trouble brands for Stellantis. I mean, they have a lot of brands. Was it 14 or 15 right now?
Mm.
Uh, the Chrysler brand, will it last? We keep being told that there's new product coming, and it's probably going to start electric. That's where they are right now, but maybe they'll surprise us with multiple variants. The Chrysler brand and the Fiat brand, those are the two most vulnerable marks. And there's a lot of people that would be surprised if they do last for more than a year or two. They're in so much trouble.